Granblue Fantasy Versus, the fighting game during a pandemic that rose against the odds. Granblue Fantasy Versus was a fighting game that was released during the COVID-19 pandemic. On February 6, 2020, it was released in Japan, and on March 3rd, 2020, it was released worldwide. The game was developed by Arc System Works, and they had in mind of introducing the series to Westerners, thinking that the format of a fighting game would be a better approach due to the series having an expanded JRPG lore that could be very daunting for a newer audience. Accessibility was considered in the beginning of the game's development, and they opted to have special inputs that can be done with one button, auto combos, and just generally a game that is very simple to grasp, but still having depth for those who want to study and become more proficient players of the game. The approach of the game was simple, a game that is very grounded, footsie heavy, but something that is very user-friendly for anyone that can play and can be introduced to the Granblue mythos, who would eventually try to experiment playing the JRPG if you like the characters and the lore. Makes sense. However, Granblue had one problem. It released during the pandemic. This is because that during that time, a lot of locals and tournaments were shut down due to the pandemic and having to abide by local laws. So your game and the community heavily relied on online and how well that connectivity and netcode work, which is something that we will discuss later on the video. Now, with the introductions out of the way, let's begin. Now, as we go through this video, I do want to give you a forewarning that we'll be speaking as if you have a general understanding on basic fighting game fundamentals. If you are looking for something like that, there are resources out there that will better suit your needs. But let us continue. One of the interesting things about Granblue's mechanics is its movement. In this game, there is a risk reward embedded within the simple concept of just simply moving. Walking is your slower but safer option. Every character has a different walk and run speeds, so there is a case-by-case scenario on how successful you can close in the gap between the two. However, unlike running, when you walk, you are able to walk immediately. Running, you cannot do that. This is because you are able to close in the gap much faster than you are with walking, but the game penalizes you with a slide. Once you are sliding, you are enabled of walking, or you can also just call it as NLAP. You can cancel your run animation with a skill, but that is a risk reward that is a case-by-case scenario. This game has a few rules when it comes to throw teching. If you throw tech in this game, immediately both players will reset into neutral and there is no advantageous state between the two. The defender will always gain 3% meter as a bonus for teching properly. However, there is an interesting nuance to this. If the defender were to try to tech the throw, but they did it late, they are still rewarded with a throw break. However, they will not be able to recover the same as the attacker, as the defender will recover a lot slower, allowing the attacker to close in the distance earlier, putting the defender in a disadvantaged state. The defender is still rewarded 3% of meter. Air teching, on the other hand, there isn't really a late air tech in this game, so that rule only applies when you're grounded. However, if you do air tech, both players are treated like ground teching, where you just reset back to neutral. Crushing is a mechanic in Granblue That only triggers when two normals that have two different priorities is being overwhelmed by another, being out prioritized. Think of priority like something of more importance. A light and a heavy that comes out at the same time, the heavy has more importance, a higher priority. So it's going to crush the light attack, allowing you to just beat it in normal and neutral. Evade. Evade is an option for you to use to dodge incoming attacks. While you are not able to gain any specific position advantage, you are strike and projectile invulnerable. So, it is a good thing to use against moves that are very difficult to deal on block, or if you want to avoid dying from chip damage. However, if predicted, Evade does have a counter hit state and a lot of end lag if you mistime it, so you can be punished. And it is also very weak against throws, so be very cautious and don't get baited. Crossover. Crossover allows you to move forward while having invulnerability from your character's chest and upwards. This is a good thing to use to close in the gap, especially in a fireball war or for moves that have a lot of recovery and you just want to close in the gap between those, or very long moves that you can take advantage of as recovery and close in the gap as well. The weakness of it is that it has the same problems with evade. With crossover, let's say if the opponent doesn't do anything, you are vulnerable at the end animation of it, so you can get counter hit. Also, unlike evade, you are weak against lows. Lows and throws, to be in fact, can make you vulnerable and allow you to lose the game if you're not careful enough. Next is the game's auto combos. Auto combos in this game will only trigger if you hit them with the close versions of your normals. If you're too far away, you get the far version of that normal. During the entire duration of your auto combo, you can cancel them into your skills within each string. It is typically something that is used mid-screen, but not something that is very advisable in the corner. Within a combo at least. If it is done within a block string, then that's perfectly okay. In the realm of Granblue, the way how your combos are these few scenarios. If you hit them with a close attack of a normal, then you would be incentivized to just do your auto combo into your skill. If you are far from doing your close attacks and you land a far normal, then like as we mentioned before, you would just get your hit confirmed and then land your skill. Now, there are some cases to where you might land a counter hit. For that, then you would just have to link it into another normal and then end it off of a skill. But the rules begin to change a little bit if you're in the corner. The corner is where the game becomes very explosive because you are now able to use the full power of your skills, which is the EX versions. They allow special properties near the corner, especially the most notable one being the wall bounce. With this, you are able to maximize the damage of your combos. In Granblue, they do have a system called the combo limit. Combo limit triggers once the opponent is airborne. Every character has their own numerical limit as to when it will trigger, so it is a case-by-case scenario as to when it will happen. But once it does, the character that is being comboed will simply become intangible and they will be unable to be hit, falling out of the combo until they rise. If you perform a combo while the character is still grounded, the combo limit will never trigger. Now, look at this example right here with this character. and how we can get an extended combo and it not being affected by combo limit versus doing it here. Characters that have ways to extend their combos before they have them airborne is highly rewarded. In Granblue, which is the most unique mechanic in the game, is their skills. Every character has a list of skills that are special commands that every character can do within their arsenal. Unlike most fighting games where you just do your special attacks, with little to no recourse in Granblue, there's a system called a cooldown. Cooldown prevents you from being able to use your skill again within a certain time, depending on which version you will do it, as there is a light, a medium, and a heavy or EX version of it. There is also another factor into this. There is the technical command and the simple command. The technical command is the one that you have to manually input the motion and the input. This one gives you more reward, and it also gives you faster cooldown. While the simple command, albeit is less execution, also gives you less damage and slower cooldowns. Now, going back into the skills themselves, the heavy version will always give you the longest cooldowns, where they're the most powerful version of your existing arsenal. And as mentioned earlier, the EX version or the heavy version, depending on how you want to describe them, they are the ones that are typically used for better combos or better extensions or just overall better tools than your medium and light counterparts. And on top of that, all skills, including EX skills, have no ties in terms of usage with the meter. If they land, you do gain meter, but enhancing them does not take any resources away from the meter itself. Later into the game's lifespan, they added 3 new mechanics. 2 of them are under the description of tactical moves, which is specific skills that you can use that deplete 50% of your meter. That being one of them, backshift. Backshift gives you an invulnerable backdash that is farther than your normal backdash, thus creating more space and being intangible. This one was pretty good if you want to get out of the bad situation and being able to escape scenarios that would otherwise put you in a very daring circumstances. You can't do it off of a block, however. You have to be in a neutral state to go do that. One thing to keep in mind is that characters with a invulnerable reversal like Gran and Catalina, their backshifts were actually slower than those who did not, like Eustace and La Diva. So that means that the recovery of your backshift was slower than those characters who did not have a reversal. Nonetheless, it still is a very strong option that you can use to help you escape really uncomfortable interactions. Rush was an attack that allows you to dash towards your opponent and commence an auto combo. When you do this, your character is completely invulnerable, not being able to be hit. If done in neutral, you cannot special cancel to your skills, and you are still at an advantage state on hit and on block as well. If you do it within a combo, then you will automatically be point blank into your opponent, and it is then special cancelable. But it should be known that once you do that, the opponent will be airborne. So you do have to be mindful of the potential risk of a combo limit. The last mechanic that they added was a system mechanic called Overdrive. Overdrive is a once per round mechanic that buffs your character You can only apply this when you have 100% meter and there'll be a red glowing icon near your portrait. Once this is achieved, there is a lot of buffs that you can gain from doing this. For starters, the startup of it is completely invulnerable, and when blocked, it pushes the opponent far away. Attacks, except for throws and supers, deal 25% more damage, making it Omega explosive. Normals also deal chip damage, and you become immune to chip damage. And the universal overhead becomes slightly faster of 2 frames, and the penalties of doing your simple inputs are removed. Now, there are downfalls that you do have to consider. One of them being that the overdrive kinda acts like a timer, but it goes down really slow. The caveat is that if you are hit during the state of overdrive, you will lose 33% of your meter. So being hit at least 3 times, it will be depleted. But it's not 3 times within a combo. It's only 3 times singular hits outside of a combo. Despite overdrive also being invincible, if it is whiffed, you are extremely vulnerable and you will be in a counter hit state. Also, you cannot use your tactical moves in this state as well. Granblue Fantasy released with a few issues, and some of those issues plagued the game all the way to the end of its life cycle. And one of those issues was the game's netcode. Granblue Fantasy released during the year 2020, and during that time, a lot of businesses and stores were shut down and people were stuck at home due to government interference, and a lot of your games lived or died based off of how good your netcode was. Granblue, using delay-based netcode, only fared better in Japan due to their infrastructure, but that did not fare very well in the US, not at all. At times, the game would run fairly okay, but there are very abysmal moments as well where it was not very playable either, or less to be desired. But there is an argument that can be made, and I wanted to give some examples to paint a bigger picture. See, Granblue wasn't the only game that ran delay-based netcode. Other games like Samurai Showdown, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Tekken 7 also ran delay-based netcode. Now, Street Fighter V had rollback, but it was poorly implemented rollback. And the only big IP that had rollback and it was very stable was Mortal Kombat 11. Now, why weren't those games suffering versus Granblue? And the issue is that Granblue is a niche IP in the US, at least during that time. The other games weren't so much, except for Samurai Showdown, which is legacy, but it was gone for too long, and that game is still pretty niche in the US. Street Fighter, even though it had bad netcode, it is still Street Fighter, the biggest fighting game out in the world at that time, so it could kind of go far with it having bad netcode. And Tekken 7 as well. It wasn't as bad as Street Fighter from at least what I recalled, but Tekken, Mortal Kombat, and Dragon Ball are all ran by Legacy. And that can't be said for Granblue. And what made matters even worse is when you go 1 year later with the release of Guilty Gear Strive in 2021. That game, regardless of which community that you were within, brought players from all over the world because it was the first game besides Mortal Kombat that was big enough that brought the whole world together with its rollback netcode. Regardless if you liked the game or not during that time, most communities were pretty affected by that. And I believe that Granblue was affected pretty heavily, seeing a lot of his player base move on to Strive. Some of them would return, obviously, that is for sure. Now, I want to talk about some of the cool things that this game provides, and I think its strongest point is definitely its ease of use. This game is very easy for you to pick up and understand what your character is supposed to do, what they're very strong at, and the execution barrier being very low. As I mentioned before, there is still nuance that you have to understand, which is actually the complexity. But in terms of like wanting to go pick up a character and learn how to play them is something that this game does far better than most other fighting games out there. And the other thing that I also highly appreciate is there are times, for me at least, there are characters that I like to play, but they are charge characters, and I don't particularly like doing charge. However, in Granblue, due to the simple motion, you can just use the simple shortcuts that will allow you to be able to play a charge character at the sacrifice of not getting the full benefit of doing the technical. And I personally really like that, and I think that is something that is also shared with other people who has the same issues that I go through when it comes to picking a character. Another thing that I also very appreciate about this game is the interesting risk reward of technical and the simple inputs that I mentioned not so long ago. I appreciate that if you want the benefit of better reward from your skills, then the game encourages you to at least try to learn the technical inputs, but giving you the option to do these simple inputs that is on paper a lot weaker than the technical ones. And I think that is an interesting balance, because in theory, the simple inputs are better for you to do when it comes to spaghetti or scramble situations where you have to think really quick on your feet, and you have that simple option to do. Like if someone doing a jump in neutral and you weren't prepared, you can do the simple DP as your anti-air. But doing the technical one would have gave you better reward. You also have the simple one. And I think that's really cool to swap between situations, between when you want to use a technical or a simple. And as I mentioned earlier about the game's ease of use, this does also help with the comfortability of, let's say, if you are okay with the idea of not really using the technical input and you're just comfortable just using simple, then more power with you. You can still find a lot of success of just using the simple inputs. Another thing that I highly appreciate about Granblue is that it is very footsie and very grounded compared to other anime fighters out there. Most noticeably, you have your games like Dragon Ball, Guilty Gear, BlazBlue, Persona, to name a few. All of them are very high-paced air dasher fighting games, and sometimes that can be a turnoff for people that don't really like the pace of those games. Granblue keeps it very slow and very footsie, very comparable to something like Street Fighter, and I greatly appreciate that, mainly because there wasn't really many anime fighters that played at that pace that encourage you to be very footsie heavy without it being a fast-paced air dasher. So I really appreciate that this game took the risk of going that route versus what we were always accustomed to in the past. Granblue top 3 characters were Belial, Fairy, and Percival. Belial was one of the best characters in the game. He had one of the best projectiles in the game. He was very fast with the recovery, and it allowed him to pressure the opponent and have a great full screen presence. And up close, he was able to do pressure resets, allowing him to do strike throw at his own accord. When Belial was up close, options like close light being +2 on block and crouching medium being +1 on block allowed him to start his pressure. As per mentioned, he can also cancel these into his fireballs, But if you wanted to stagger pressure with these buttons or do frame traps, it will allow him to get great counter hit confirms that will lead into pretty reasonable damage. Or if you're too afraid to press anything, then he can also start running up to you with throw or command throw at his own volition. Belial also can steal his turn back when it comes to the opponent's offense if they want to play at a range he's not comfortable, which is the mid range, or they wanted to zone him out. He can also use his 5U, which is his unique. It's a parry that allows him to close the gap. And once it lands, he's able to start his Oki and force his offense up and close with the opponent, starting all over again with his offensive pressure. Fairy was also one of the strongest characters in the game. She was a set play zoning type character, and she would bully the opponent with her far normals, and eventually when she got a hit confirm, cause a hard knockdown, and then start setting up her pets, which then you will have to guess on highs or lows, or however she wanted to do a setup on you. She was also very polarizing because of the fact that she was able to zone out the cast where her massive normals of far medium, to medium, and far heavy. And if on hit confirm, she was able to get pretty decent reward off of landing it. Once on knockdown, she was able to set up her Oki and slowly kill you off of ambiguous set play mix-ups. The hardest part is trying to close in the gap between yourself and her zoning you with very strong normals, sometimes simply just by doing nothing and you committing to something like a roll. She can exploit that and easily punish you because you anticipated her throwing out a normal. The only thing that she was very weak against was jump-ins because she had a fairly weak anti-air game, being that her only anti-air normal was 1, slow, and then 2, it was air blockable, unlike most of the other characters. So she would have to resort in using her reversal. However, the problem is that's her only reversal. The problem with that is that it's a very expensive cost for an anti-air. If the opponent were to somehow be up close and personal with her face, her only reversal option would be that one that she spent using it with anti-air. So if she doesn't have meter and wants to load on a super, then she has to hold her defense as best as she could. Fairy also has very low life, so being hit as a Fairy player is devastating and can cost you the entire game off of one interaction. Then there's Percival. Percival had all the tools he needed to be an amazing character. He had a fireball that could not be rolled and could not dodge. And on top of that, he had far range normals that had you made the mistake of running or you misplace your normal, he can easily whiff punish you and convert into very high damage. His specific unique, which is the 5U, was a command throw. Once landed, was rewarded with a combo that he can convert into. What makes Percival extremely dangerous is his dominance in the mid-range. He's able to out-footsie you in ranges that most of the cast struggle with, and he's also able to gain high reward, to the point where you feel like you shouldn't do anything, and if you allow him to condition you to play defense, then he's simply going to keep building the buff that allows him to increase his damage and change the properties of his skill with the install buff. Once he puts in a stock in, he's able to increase the damage and change the properties of his existing skills, which makes him more dangerous. So him just getting a simple knockdown incentivizes him to continue adding the buffs on him so he can continuously have debuff versions. He's also able to whiff punish very awkward moves due to his DP being able to move forward first and then going upwards. So there's a lot of moves that he can just punish at very weird ranges and get a lot of reward from. On top of the fact that he had such high damage outputs in his conversions, whiffing on him could equal death, as he can just whiff punish you and then go into the Lord Strike skill and delete your HP with the heavy version. Those were the three characters that dominated in Granblue, and they dictated the meta. If you weren't strong enough to handle what they were able to offer, then you more or less weren't able to play the game. And speaking about not being able to play the game very well, we have the three weakest characters. Ladiva is the grappler of the game, and she was one of the weaker characters. This is due to the fact that she is very slow with her movement options, and it can be very clunky and awkward trying to get in neutral. One of the problems is that approaching with her can be a little bit risky, judging that you can try to run, but it's very slow. You can try rolling, but her roll animation is one of the longer ones in the game. So if she were to whiff, then you have more time to whiff punish that than other characters. One of the moves that Ladiva liked using is their sweep. This is because of the fact that it comes up very fast and it costs a hard knock, allowing them to start poking. One of the problems, however, is the fact that it is not special cancelable and it is very unsafe to block. If blocked at specific ranges, this can be very punishing for them for using that option. On top of the fact that they do have Lariat is also an interesting option for them to do, for it is plus on block, but the biggest problem with Lariat is the fact that it is not hitting anyone who is crouching. So you would want to low profile under this, and if they end up whiffing it because you're ducking, it leaves them very vulnerable for a counter. Soares was another character that had awkward movement and struggles with neutral. He also lacked very strong defensive options. When being pressured, typically they would have to rely on Muscle Fury. However, Muscle Fury was an armor attack, so if you're able to bait it out, then they can be thrown for free, or you just wait for the entire animation to play out and do the punishment. His main approach option was using Impact Knuckle, which was this rush attack where he punches you. However, the issue with this move is that if you had options that could deal with this, let's say like a fireball or a very strong mid to far range poke, then you can easily shut him down and making him forced to play neutral, which is something that he doesn't particularly like. If Soares is in front of you, then he is kind of in a comfortable spot where he can start his game plan of pressuring you, but in the far mid-range game, he doesn't fare very well. Being sort of stubby, but not completely stubby like Gran, so it can be really awkward to play within that range with him, and you would have to make very risky calls for moderate reward, and if the opponent manages to escape and push you back into the neutral, then it's a long hill to battle. Avatar Belial is interesting because of the fact that he has the lowest life in the game, making him very unstable. Another issue that the character has is for him to maximize damage for combos, he has to continuously take damage. So every time he does an extension, he has to keep chipping away of his HP, which can be a little daunting because even though you may work really hard to get all the damage out that you can, that is another step closer for if the opponent does land one particular hit, your character blows up like a balloon. Another issue that Avatar Belial has is that he shares some of the same normals like regular Belial, but a few of them are actually worse versions than what regular Belial would have. His regular 5M actually being unsafe, and his 2M causing a knockdown on normal hit unlike the original, making hit confirm links not possible, and it can only be cancelable into a skill. This makes consistent hit confirm a little weird, all because that you have to always be aware that once you land it, you have to convert it to a skill, versus regular Belial is 2M and combo into itself, and then you can confirm into a skill. Granblue offers many different types of flavor or archetypes that you can choose from. If you just want the jack of all trades, master of none, then you have characters that are well-rounded like Gran or Catalina, which is kind of like the Shoto style. If you want to be more excelling at harassing the range like a zoner, that's Fairy. She will zone you out with her physical attacks. Or if you're someone that likes to zone out with projectiles, you have someone like Matera. If you don't want to do any of that and you just be extremely aggro, you have someone who is a hyper rushdown character with strike throw mix up like Seox or Six. If you're someone that likes to do pressure at close range with a lot more of left right mix and high low mix, you have someone like Charlotta, who also has a parry as well. There is also Beelzebub, who can do a mixture of both zoning and pressure, who can make the opponent having to switch gears at a dime. If you want to play slower, make your opponent fear you at close range and then get the satisfying throw, then you have the body of Ladiva playing as a grappler. Or if you have someone who is just a big body who likes to get in your face and throw armor and do devastating damage, you have someone like Basaraga. Not interested in any of that, and you like one of the gimmicky characters that like to summon things, then you have Lil Wayne, who is able to just summon a bunch of his homies that can help him win the match. And he also has a pretty interesting super if you try it out. And if none of that happens and you just want boots to ground and a solid footsies character, then like we mentioned, Percival would get the job done. Like I mentioned, there are other type of archetypes in this game as well, but I wanted to mention the ones that stood out the most that will give you a general understanding of what you can get into. The character I like to play the most is Gran, the main character, and this is because typically in fighting games, I usually play the main character. He has all the tools I need for me to just play the game at any way how I want to. If I want to zone or if I want to play defensive or aggressive, I have all the tools necessary. Sure, he is a little stubby and that can be problematic at times, but I can always play at a very particular range with my fireballs, and if I want to close in the gap and force my plus frames at a certain distance, we have overdrive surge. And also he does a lot of damage. He hits you, you practically die if you have your optimal combos. And honestly, I do like the character's aesthetic. Despite it's very bland versus the rest of the cast, it was enough for me to get invested with the character, and soon within day one of playing the game, I immediately knew this was the guy I was going to play. And even in Rising, I still played him. Now, in terms of picking it up as a product, it's not something I can completely recommend, mainly because there is Rising. However, if you're not a fan of the way how Rising plays, because that game is a little bit more explosive in terms of like system mechanic, then I would highly recommend trying this game out when it's on sale and give it a try with one of your buddies. You can get the game on PlayStation and Steam. Although don't expect to play anyone online. If you do, just know you might have a less than desirable experience due to the delay-based netcode. Or if you just want to try it out to draw comparisons to Rising, then definitely go for it. You'd be surprised on how the identity of a game's franchise changes over time. And sometimes you might like the oldies. Who's to say? Thank you for making it to the very end. It took a while to finish this, mainly because of work and whatnot. But if you want more video essays about fighting games, then please drop a follow and comment on what you would like for me to go look into. I love fighting game as the genre, so I play and will invest time into any of them. So your comments will mean a lot. Other than that, this is Kyron Dude Bro. Do take care out there. I'll see you guys next time.